Today's video may have to be a bit shorter than usual, not because I have a lot of things to do, but because I don't really think I have anything that interesting to say this week. Basically, in a few weeks ago, I talked about how I have restarted my book, and now I'm doing it from the third person instead of the first person because I realised it was more suited to the way that I write prose. And I do think it is still working. However, whenever I went back to write some more, there was something standing out to me that I was missing. That I could instinctively tell there is something I haven't worked out. There is something that's missing from this. There's something that I need to add. There's there was the story was saying something to me, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And I knew, it's one of those things where until I work out what it is and I figure out what I need to do, it's difficult for me to see a point of continuing to write this. Sometimes that's just the way it can be. So I thought about it for a while, and I sort of consulted with myself, and eventually I realised that if I'm doing this in the third person, then it's not just what I was doing before was just sort of writing the same story as it had been already, but I was just doing it from the third person. What I actually need to do is to really open up and expand that to its full potential. Because the issue I've got with my main character is that sort of the whole point of them is that they don't have that much plot power. In other words, that they can't really exert that much influence over things that happen to them. That's kind of the point. That's sort of where they are at the beginning of the story. That it's all very restricted, and everything is very specific, and it's sort of like they're on rails in a way. That they can't really be a proactive character because that's not the kind of life they lead. They can only really react to stuff that happens. And I realised that's quite difficult for me to write, and I realised what I need to do is if this is a romance novel and I'm writing it in the third person and I'm having this issue, why don't I start also writing scenes with the other main character in it, so that instead of the reader only ever seeing him when the main character sees him, he is the second main character in his own right. And I thought that really is what I ought to have been doing from the first place. If this is like a story about these two people, why have I only been telling it from one character's point of view? Why not both of them? That will make sense, because also the big problem that I have known has been there pretty much the whole time I've been writing it is this character is basically just the love interest. That's just the function that they have. They're not really a character on their own. And I thought this character, in previous drafts that I've written, that was all they were really there to do, to just be the love interest. And I thought, I need to develop this character as much as the other one, so it's about both of them. And now that I'm doing it in the third person, I've realised that's what I need to do. And that also means that what I'm writing is less restricted, that I can cut away from one of them to the other when I want to. And that also means I can now have like dramatic ways to sort of link from one scene to another, where you might have a character saying one thing and then you cut to the scene with the other character and they're saying something that sort of ties into what the other character was saying. Kind of like the thing that Alan Moore does in Watchmen. That kind of device where it's like an overlap of colour or word that's like linking one frame of the page to the next one. I've always liked that when the end of a scene and the beginning of another scene link together, so it feels like there's an actual intention behind the order, and that it sort of carries the reader through, so it's not boring. It's not just a series of things happening. That's what I might try. The problem is, though, that basically means that I now have to develop this second character into as full a character as the main character, their life and what they do. And I have begun to think about it, but it sounds like it's going to be a lot of work, because I want them to be as developed and as full a character as the main character. Otherwise, there's no point. If they're both going to be sort of like of equal status, that's necessary. But I haven't really been thinking about it. Now I have to. And what I'm basically now doing is doubling the workload that I have. I'm having to sort of develop this other character to the same level of complexity as the main character, as where I know as much about their life as the main character, and I'm essentially just sort of adding double the number of scenes, but potentially adding the double number of scenes and story. Or maybe not. Maybe I can cut some of the stuff I've got with the main character and then replace it with stuff from the other character. Maybe I don't know. I've never written a book before. I don't really know how to do it. I'm just doing whatever I can think of. But essentially, I'm now having to do what I've already done again, from the ground up. And that's a lot of work. I'm doubling the workload. And you might say, well, if it's that much work, why bother? Why not just not do that? You can choose not to do that. And I can choose not to do that, sure. But the thing is, when I sit there looking at the page thinking, there's something missing from this story, there's something I need to add to it, and the story speaks to me, I know if I have to do this and it makes sense, that I have to do it. Because otherwise, I'm just going to be typing thinking, I know this doesn't work without all that extra material. I don't really get a say in this. The story tells me what it needs to be, and I have to do it. And sometimes it realizes, oh yeah, I need you to do this. Which is going to actually just sort of take all the paperwork I've just worked through, taken all from my pile, I've worked through it all. They just come along and just put a whole other pile there and say, there, all that work you've done, it's now gone back up again. So, I do feel kind of like Sisyphus, but the whole point of the myth of Sisyphus is that actually within that sort of endless repeating cycle, Sisyphus found meaning and he found structure. It's a misunderstood myth. A lot of myths are, but the whole point of the myth of Sisyphus is actually within that sort of life that he found himself, that's where he got his meaning and his purpose and his sense of understanding of some sort of order. And that's what I'm doing. My book is the only thing I really understand. So that's why I have to keep writing it. Which basically means, however close I was to finishing this, I'm not that close anymore. I've sort of had to take a big step back, almost to square one, and say, right, I'm going to imagine this main character is only a supporting character now, and from now on I'm all about this other character, and I'm thinking about them and imagining that they are the sole protagonist. Then I can finally join them together. But oh, it's oh god, it's so tiring. But that's the work, and it must be done. So that's where I am with this at the moment. That's really all there is to say. One day this will all be over. One day. But as for now, I just have to keep going. Because you never know what tomorrow brings.